Hopefully that won't look blown out on the screen. So I'll start with naphtha on a cotton bud. Start here. Where am I? Here. I'm holding the blade with a toothpick so that I don't scratch it or leave any marks on it. And I'm just swabbing that surface down and inspecting the surface as I go to see how well it cleans up. And I don't like what I see. I'll see if I can manipulate this so it'll catch the light. Yeah, you can see there's a mark here. That's where blades overlap. And you might see a dirty mark here. Well, that's like some light surface corrosion on that edge. And on the other face of the blade, position this so it catches the light. There's some surface corrosion here. There's also a tiny dent here. You can see it as a bright spot as I shift that blade backwards and forwards. That means something thumped into the side of the blade most likely. Yeah, I can just see a tiny dent there. I'll have to work out which side of the shutter that's on and see if I can position that blade in the shutter somewhere where that's not going to cause me a problem. It's quite faint, but yeah, you can certainly see it there. So these blades I'm going to have to clean with Brasso to get all these marks off them and make sure the blades are nice and smooth. Then I can come back and clean them off carefully with the naphtha and I should be good to go. Right, back once they're clean. Well, here's the blades I'm about to clean. As you can see, this board with a piece of cloth stretched over it has seen a lot of use. So I'm just going to spread those out. When you're cleaning shutter blades, you have to be very cautious not to bend them. If you put a bend in them, you'll never get them flat again. And as a result, they won't run over each other smoothly. You can see the blades effectively stick to the surface of this cleaning board, and I can polish one surface quite well. Then I've got to flip them over and do the other side. Be very, very careful not to catch your cloth on the edge of one of the blades and folding it up. Otherwise you'll be in for a replacement blade. That's good. Flip these blades over. That was the easy side, and now the blades will want to slide around on my board, so I'm going to have to hold them as I go, which means holding them down with a cotton bud and making sure I polish the blade over its entire length. I hope I haven't missed any. I think I've just got one more to do. Alright, so far so good. Now I need to buff them off to some extent. So I'll just move along here a bit. And by watching the reflection on the surface of the blade from the window light beside me, I can see how well I've done. And those blades I'll pop away, and they're all going to have to be cleaned with naphtha, as I said, to remove all traces of the metal polish. And I strongly suspect that the metal polish has some preservative action for when you're polishing copper or brass, so it's probably got some wax component in it, and I certainly don't want that left on the blades. Shutter blades are easy to deal with for things like this because they're flat, they have no rivets or posts on them to catch the cloth, so it's not too difficult to do this carefully enough to get away with it. Diaphragm blades can also be polished if they're corroded, but I don't do that unless I absolutely have to, because your chance of catching your cleaning cloth on one of the pivot rivets on a blade is very, very high, and then the blades will buckle up, and if the blades aren't dead flat, not only will the diaphragm not run as freely as it should do when you want to adjust it, it's also very, very difficult to assemble them because you have to have the blades carefully interleaved, and it's very difficult to get the blades all seated correctly if one or more of them is bent out of shape and popping out of position. Alright, that's good. I'll just pop that metal polishing gear to one side. And I will restart the video after I've adjusted the aperture again. Alright, hopefully that'll be alright. So these shouldn't need much cleaning. I've just got to make sure that I remove all traces of polish from those blades. So again, using naphtha. Yeah, those blades have come up really well. Those marks that were on them are gone, and they look pretty much brand new. Again, I've got the window light coming in from this side, and as I move my head I can see how the light plays across the blade, and it allows me to see how well I've cleaned it and whether there is any corrosion or rough spots visible. Those blades all look really good. So much for that. My next task is to lubricate the mechanism plate. The case is cleaned. Once I've lubricated the mechanism plate, the blades can be put back in place, and then fit the screws to hold the case closed. I don't think I've got any of that. Right, start again. I have to lubricate my mechanism plate here. So what I do is I pop a little bit of graphite powder down those next to those pins. Swing the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. Or I would do if I could. What's dropped in? That's better. To work that in, I'll go and blow that excess powder off. And then the shutter blades can be assembled to it. I'm just making sure my tweezers are clean because they've been used to handle that metal polish, that brasso, and the blades with brasso on them. I want them nice and clean. So I check that my blade actuating ring is in the position where the blades are fully open, which is this way, with the arm right against the post. We start with one of the plain blades. Now remembering one of these blades has got a slight dent on it, hasn't it? It's that one. I'll make that, just looking at the way that dent is, that's been pushed in from the front, so something was hit that blade from the front. But the blade goes here. We'll make that the first blade. The second blade goes here. That was the one with the cutout at the back to clear that position. The third blade goes here. Fourth blade goes here. Fifth blade goes here, and the cover blade or sixth blade goes back over on top of the first blade at this point. I'll swing the blade actuating ring in slightly to bring the edge of my blades in from the case, so I don't catch them on the case as I lower the case over. Now I have to fit the case. It only goes on in one position. That's it. And that's held in place with 3 screws, countersunk head screws. And I'll get one of those in position straight away. Find the other 2. Oh, that's clever. What have I done with those? Oh, there's one of them. And there's the other. just run those in. Yeah, I'm just running those in lightly, I'm not doing them up tight. I want to check that I have everything correct. So if I flip that back, the blades snap shut. That's good, it means everything's correct. Blades swing open and closed. And I can tighten those 3 screws up. And that's our mechanism plate with the blades reinstalled. As you can see, those blades look nice and clean and happy now on both surfaces. Not as they were before, all marked and looking all of their 60 years of age. The next part that I have to do is to get this ring back in place, and this ring here. That ring, of course, is used to set the self timer or change the flash sync speed. Just making sure I've got 3 screws that match here, because one of the screws inside the shutter is almost the same, except it's just slightly shorter. And if I was to put a long screw on the retard gear train, it would stick through the mechanism plate and cause me problems, so I don't want to do that. Alright, so these components. I think I want some molybdenum to lubricate that. So I just want to put a tiny white, there's a little sort of like ratchet teeth here where a lever binds against that and holds it in the cocked position. And I just wanted to make sure that that's got a little bit of lubricant on it so that the ratchet slides over it smoothly and releases easily. Now there's a detent spring hidden just behind this post, so you can't see it. It's a little detent spring in there. So I'm just putting a bit of molybdenum on there, and that detent runs against this post, this pin, and I want that to move smoothly. So I can drop this lever in place. I need to make sure, come on camera, keep up. I need to make sure that the pin is on this side of the spring. The return spring is here, the pin needs to be on this side of it. That's correct. This is held in place with this plate. It has a little cutout where the tube comes through, and it's got a little detent here which locks against that ring, so just set that into its groove so it's located. And there are 3 screws. In this case they are round-headed screws. In other cases you might find that they are countersunk or flathead screws. They would have chosen to use these screws in this case, I would imagine, because it saves them having another operation of countersinking holes for countersunk head screws. Just checking that's in place, checking that the lever here moves freely. That's good. If I flip that lever, it just drops back to that second position. So that's good, that lever's in place. Now this piece here, I don't think I mentioned that. That's the front plate of a Reflex S that I'm using to hold the shutter and support it while I'm working on it. And it's very good for that purpose because it means that the flash sync contact at the back here doesn't get damaged. The shutter in the Reflex S, or the 3 or 4 for that matter, they're fairly similar to this, and a lot of parts are common. So far so good. The next pieces I need to put in place will be these pieces for the flash sync. So these parts, I just want to clean these quickly with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud, and then they can go in position. There's usually, it's quite common for this little pallet wheel to be stained or marked. That will have no effect on its action. These parts are quite clean. As I said, the shutter's been serviced a number of times before. So the pallet wheel drops in here on that pivot, and as it revolves you'll see the pallet wheel ratchet backwards and forwards. The pallet wheel's got a little gear on it. The little pinion gear on the pallet wheel runs against this little sector gear here. I'm just going to apply a tiny bit of molybdenum to the little corner here, this edge. That's a latch, that's where it latches in position. And that's just so that it'll latch into position smoothly and release smoothly. I'll zoom you in a bit more. That's probably as good as we get. Alright, so I pull that lever back out of the way, I can swing that arm in and put the spring in place. And to get the spring in place, I use a pair of needle nose pliers to grasp the spring. It has to be hooked over this hook post here, and into the other end drops into that hole in that arm there. You don't want to overstretch it, so you need to be able to get that in place smoothly. That's fine, hold the B lever back and that's all working smoothly. Now I've got a couple of spots I want to lubricate with some molybdenum paste here. So I'll gather a little bit on the end of this toothpick. This point here and here on the blade actuating ring, those 2 points are picked up by the main drive cam as it rotates. So I've just put a little bit of molybdenum paste on those 2 points. And where are we? A bit hard to see there, let me move that round a bit. Here is that detent spring that runs against that post on the blade actuating ring, and where that detent spring runs over that tiny post needs to have a little smear of molybdenum grease or paste. That just ensures that that runs very smoothly. It just needs a tiny touch. Molybdenum is a very good lubricant. You're not slathering it on like greasing up the wheels on an old trailer. It's just a tiny touch of it is all that's required. So the rest of the flash sink mechanism can go on next. I'm gathering up my components. The 2 screws and the spring, and then we'll put that in later. Okay, so again I want to clean these components with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud. If this component is contaminated with oil or grease, you'll find that it doesn't move smoothly, and it certainly doesn't return to the rest position under the action of its return spring, because any serious oil contamination here will get between the 2 large flat surfaces here and effectively stick them together. I'm just checking the action of that. Checking that it works freely, that's good. This component, normally I'll put a little bit of molybdenum in the centre where it clips into place. That fits over a post here. There's a little spring contact for the flash here. This goes, that spring contact has to come back in over the top of this lever, so getting it into position is always a bit tricky. It's even worse when you're doing things back to front so that you can see. Ooh. That's it. It's sitting down in position correctly. The spring is up against the inside of the case. That's all correct. The flash contact. The flash contact goes on top of that post. Now I can see that that's got a bit of grease or something on the top of it. That's moved quite positively by the mechanism, so it was unlikely that was going to stick and cause me issues, but I don't want that greasy mark on there anyway. So I've got to get this in position on there. That drops into place. You can see that the arm on this flash, the contact, the moving contact, is towards away from the edge of the case. Now when the flash contact makes, it touches between here on this moving arm and here on that fixed contact. So you need to make sure that there's a gap between the two. If you want to make a mess of assembling the shutter and making sure that the flash never works, you get this little contact stuck on the wrong side of this contact, so that effectively the flash contact is made at all times. Try and avoid that. So I'll just set that lever across, which cocks that mechanism, and I should be able to drop this plate into position. There's a touch of grease there. Where'd that come from? Off the tweezers. What was that from? Right, so there are 2 screws here, a small plain screw, flat-headed screw here at this end. I'll just get that set. At the other end, we have a spring which sits like that, and a shoulder screw which holds that spring in position. Just run that screw down to make sure that the spring is free to revolve around the shoulder on that screw, not trapped underneath it, and I can nip that screw up. The spring, the long arm of the spring needs to be lifted over the top of this moving arm here, and it drops down just behind it. There's a little groove in the back of that arm, and the spring drops into there, and you can see that's sprung loaded. Next component. I'm just putting a tiny smear of molybdenum paste on the pivot. This is the shutter release lever. It sits in here, drops into a socket there. Now, you have to make sure it fits underneath that B lever at that end. Now the spring on this lever needs to come right across and get tucked in at this side. So it comes all the way across and gets tucked in there.